Hello, everyone. My name is Cherae Robinson. I'm the founder of Tastemakers Africa. I'm super excited to be here. I know we're waiting for the rest of our panel and our moderators, but maybe if you guys that are joining our session, maybe we can use this time for you to tell us who you are. Our moderator's here. Hey, Joan.
Hi. Doing? Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for starting the conversation. You can hear me? Cherae, you can continue. Tell us who you are.
Oh, yes, I can do that. So my name is Cherae Robinson. I am the founder and CEO of Tastemakers Africa, which is an experiences platform that connects Africa and the diaspora all around the world. We are a travel tech company headquartered in New York, but with operations in Ghana, Senegal, and South Africa, and a network all across the continent. I am super excited to join two people that I know really well and that I love and support the work that they do, and more people that are doing amazing work that I am meeting for the first time, but have followed their work, and excited to meet those of you joining the session as well.
Thank you so much. And Gael, you want to give us a brief introduction of who you are?
Sure. My name is Gael Ruboneka. I'm a co-founder of Illume and Illume Editions. I'm a biologist by training. I've been involved for quite a long time in conservation and in tourism by default. I worked for about a decade in Gabon, further on in both republics of Congo. I'm an author of 6 books on wildlife, natural history, and photography. I'm looking forward for a great session today. Tourism is on our minds.
It's good to have you both here. It's actually exciting. It's funny that we know each other this well, but I don't know if we've ever had a nice conversation like this about the tourism industry. So it'll be really good to get started. I'm waiting for 2 other people, Bonita and Bale, who will be joining us. But I think because of time, that maybe we can get started a little bit on maybe the general question that I'd want to ask. We just kind of start a conversation. Then I get into some specifics about where you, based on your expertise. So here we are right now in the middle of this crisis, in the middle of this pandemic. That's a global pandemic. I don't think we've really been living through something that's affected so many countries at once. And of course, one of the first major industries to be affected is the tourism and travel industry. Like on first thought, what were your first thoughts when it came to African's tourism industry? Like, what was the first thing that you thought about when this started to happen? I'll start with Cherae.
It was really interesting because we were coming off of in the US market, probably one of the biggest years for interest in African tourism that was non-safari based. And so coming off of that momentum, the idea was like 2020 was going to be huge. And, you know, as a company, we sort of closed out 2019, raising capital. You know, one of the former CEO of Expedia made a significant investment in our company. And so, you know, the idea was like, you know, heads down Q1 of 2020, and then really begin pushing, you know, new destinations, figuring out how to take year of return to other places, and then COVID-19. And I think for 2 weeks, I was definitely sort of like, I just need to be still and be quiet. Like, I need to be still and be quiet and try to understand what this looks like. And then there was like the realization that travel in the traditional sense was going to be fundamentally disrupted, at least for the rest of 2020. And so that was like for me, it was like more of a like big moment to just sit down and like take it all in, because I knew it was fundamentally changed. But I knew I didn't have all the answers right away.
The key thing is because, like you were saying, 2020 was a big year for travel, I think for individuals, but for destinations as well. The year of the return was such a big moment for African tourism, for Ghanaian tourism. And so the rest of us, I think, were also ready to jump on travel in Africa for 2020. We were all set. And so that is actually quite a blow to the industry, but along the tourism value chain. And I think maybe I could jump a little bit to Gael and maybe talk specifically about the side of conservation, especially in African travel and conservation are completely directly linked. Our main tourism attractions are usually natural attractions, and the preservation of those is key. So Gael, I think I want you to talk a little bit about, like, considering that the majority of the attractions are tourism attractions, and now we have a situation. Yay! Hi, Bonita.
Hi, how are you? I'm terribly sorry.
Oh, perfect. Good. No, it's okay. I was also delayed. It's great to have you here.
Great.
So looking at the conservation side, Gael, the fact that with the reduced capacity in the national parks, people have to stay home. People are not supposed to be doing the jobs they usually do. And the fact that the resources that we're going to be getting might be going to other parts of the tourism and travel industry that might be considered a bit more important, like the travel industry, hotels. What do you think is the key thing that we have to keep in mind in terms of what we have to do? Sorry, what we have to do towards conservation? Yeah.
Thank you for your question. It's a very important one. It's not an easy one to answer. You have to look at it from both either a tourism perspective, an environmental biodiversity perspective. The continent has about 1,000 protected areas, about less than 300 are national parks. Very few of those are actually reliant on tourism money. Wildlife tourism has been developed in parts of East Africa, in parts of South Africa. Rwanda is a recent one in there, but it's still lagging in the majority of the continent. So essentially, your question is touching about how do we finance conservation, since tourism isn't the main one, or it's an unequally distributed across the continent. So far, it's been government money, it's been philanthropy, foreign donors and institutions, and this COVID comes and this is disrupting everything. Now, I believe a lot of the funded protected areas will continue to be funded for at least a little bit of time. We are waiting to see what's going to happen in the next few months, possibly at the end of 2020. How is everything faring? I am, interestingly, not too worried about nature-based tourism. It is usually high-end, smaller number. It has a tendency to be resilient if the conditions are met. It's relatively safe as well. We're not talking about big gathering, mass gathering. We're talking about smaller numbers in smaller lodges. So that makes work relatively faster, or maybe we will see. Can you guys see me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So there are ongoing questions about how the evolution of funding or conservation is going to come. I've seen a few things popping up here and there. People are discussing about the need to now diversify funding for conservation. There are discussions on carbon credit coming to finance. Maybe that could be, but the problem is the complexity. There are discussions on financial innovation on this, and proving cash flow capitals and investment in conservation. We will see tourism will play a big part, but at the continent scale, I believe it's still to take off. I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
It was a trick of the unmuting. Thank you for that. I think there is the opportunity, there's still the possibility that things could go relatively back to normal, as it were, with a few changes, depending, I guess, on how we approach it. And so I want to talk to Bonita now a little bit about, as someone in the private, I've been seeing the messaging that's around like stay home, stay safe, and travel later, which is assuming that very confidently that things will kind of get back to normal. The travel and tourism industry will be open for business soon. So having you obviously been traveling quite a bit and promoting Rwanda as a destination and generally African tourism, and you're involved deeply with the private sector. So what would it mean for private sector leaders like yourself to increase opportunities if there's a threat towards international travel? If people are saying, I'm not going to travel that far for the next few years, or I'm too afraid of getting on a plane and getting in crowds, how do you think that we should continue to market ourselves to international tourists? I guess this is everybody's question across the world. And what does it mean for African travel when it comes to increasing opportunities for domestic tourism, which may not necessarily be as high of a priority?
That's a great question. First of all, I want to make things clear. International travelers are still going to travel. It is going to happen next year, so 2021. As a destination, we have positioned ourselves as, the destination to visit. We have the wildlife, we've got, the luxury hotels, and we really, as a destination, have been collectively going out there and marketing. I think for the last few years, I think we have been sort of on the road marketing the destination. And honestly, everybody wants to visit the destination. It's so intriguing. It's our culture, it's our history, it's the wildlife, and the conservation efforts, of course. So one thing that we are finding is the clients that we had that were booking 2020 are postponing. So rather than canceling their bookings, they're actually postponing to next year. So what we're looking at now, so this would usually be our peak season, so the summer months. So that's kind of moved towards summer next year. So that's already a good sign. As the US is our biggest source market. And, we've sort of been, as a private sector, I think, even since, sort of Corona, we've kind of been in conversation with the international travel agents, with the market. What should we do? What are we doing? And we're still getting people to say they want to book. So the international market will always be there. They still want to travel. So by Q2 next year, I'm predicting things are going to be back to normal. The key thing is I actually had a client yesterday who said, Bonita, can I come in July?
This July.
We were not even sure if the course will actually, yes, this July. So he was sort of moving his booking from June to July. So they really want to come. They're intrigued about the destination. It's just, the thing is, there's a lot of uncertainty around when will borders open and when can they actually fly into the destination. So that's the issue. With the hotels on the ground, we kind of sort of have our ear, we're kind of waiting to hear, from the governments. Once they do open, I still think that will really happen. I know that there's travel in the US still. So if you want to, you can get a flight from JFK to London at the moment. So those flights are still, the flights still. So there's a chance that it will, as soon as we hear that borders are open, I believe international travelers will start traveling. So that's one thing I've got to mention. So let's not, sort of write them off. They're still there. Still our biggest source market. Of course, one thing that, and that's something that perhaps we haven't really focused on in the past was the domestic, the regional, the continent actually. And that's one thing we certainly have to look at. And perhaps it takes something like this for us to kind of look on the continent and say, I know for a fact I've got an offering that somebody in Nigeria who has the income can actually come to Rwanda.
Yeah.
I mean, I think even for the last few years, we have people coming here for your sort of very exclusive wedding. So that sort of incentive travel as well on the continent. So that's something that I feel there's a lot of potential. We have the flights coming in. I mean, the airlift from the region, you know, from South Africa to Kenya to West Africa. I mean, we're incredibly connected. So I still think there's a market there. Perhaps it's the hotels really looking at their rates and sort of having that rate for your African resident, because what we have done in the past is sort of look at more East Africa rather than the continent in general. So I think that's the first thing, is to make sure that we're looking at the rest of the continent and giving them the sort of domestic rates, or sort of that are covering the entire continent. So I certainly feel that there is potential. You have people that have the spending power. And I always say, because we position ourselves as a luxury destination, people that generally buy luxury, and Africans do love to buy luxury. Africans would like to buy, you know, they'd love to buy a Rolex, or they like to treat yourself to a new Prada handbag, which is a new season. Rwanda is the in destination now. I think we sort of fall in line. You know, when somebody's buying a luxury product, I think they also want to buy luxury travel. So I still feel that Rwanda as a destination can be able to offer this, and that will certainly happen. So we just really have to make sure we're going into, you know, there's countries, we're going to Nigeria, we're going to Ghana, we're going to South Africa, we're going to Kenya, and we're marketing ourselves and getting people to come and see our product, because we've got phenomenal products. So I certainly feel that the international market will survive. It will start in 2021, and then the continent, we've got to look at that now and see what we can do now to make sure that we have those travelers coming in. The key thing, I think the key messaging now is stay home, stay safe, and that's incredibly important. I think everybody must sort of adhere to that. You want to make sure, especially even with the parks, is protecting you know, endangered species, which is incredibly important, because without those, then we won't have any travelers coming in. So I think it is important to make sure that we are sort of adhering to that. We're staying at home. We are making sure that, you know, and our government has been, Rwanda as a government has been incredible. I mean, we're still in lockdown. I mean, you see all the preventative measures that, you know, they are doing. You've got to wear a mask when you're out in public. So just making sure that we are doing that, I think, which is quite key, which most Rwandans are doing.
I want to jump in, since I see that Anne is off, and so that we can maybe keep the combo going. I saw a question in the chat about the mandatory vaccinations that might be a challenge to tourism in Africa, from Tracy. So I just figured until Anne comes back, we'll kind of maybe take some questions from the audience.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm happy to hop in there. So interesting things happening with how African destinations are actually thinking about that process. So I've been a part of a working group that was established by the CEO of the Ghana Tourism Board. And one of the interesting things we've been doing is having breakout sessions about how to use this moment to actually cut through some of the red tape that has been blocking African tourism for a long time. And one of those things has been mandatory vaccinations. And so one of the things people are looking at is, do we use this moment to relax visa requirements and potentially relax vaccinations that are maybe outdated, or protocols that are outdated, at least in West Africa. I'm not sure if the same is in East Africa, but this is a conversation we've been having around more so on the visa side, less so on the vaccination side, but sort of how do we use this moment knowing that, you know, there was momentum around travel on the continent, but we will need a jump start. So when you look at the population of people that were doing, you know, year of return style travel, who were planning to go to the continent again, those are the very populations that are going to be hit hardest economically by COVID. There are also communities that are hit hardest health-wise because of health disparities and many external destinations. And so I think while conservation tourism, as Gael rightly pointed out, is likely going to be fine because it's luxury and it's kind of been the bedrock of the industry, some of the more nascent tourism on the continent, which brings tourism to wider benefits in the population, are going to suffer because those communities externally are communities that are going to be hit hardest by COVID. So I wanted to just posit those two thoughts around, you know, the relaxation of visas that might happen, and the disparities between the inbound populations on the international side. So I just wanted to posit those based on what the audience was saying. Welcome back, Joan.
Hi guys, sorry about that. So I think that what I've heard from you guys actually is that, first of all, we want things to go back to normal as soon as possible, obviously, and the possibility of that happening is actually quite high.
Yeah, we can.
Can you all hear me okay? So how do you think that we need to work together as a continent in terms of like next steps? Sorry, Bonita, I cut off at the end when you were talking about, how do you all think that we should approach going forward? Unfortunately, we don't necessarily have a policy point of view right now. We're having some trouble with connecting. But what would it mean for the private sector, for the government to work together in terms of what are the steps we take from this point, like from tomorrow, so that the people along the value chain aren't losing their livelihood, aren't losing as much time as they might be if we don't do anything?
Okay, so I could sort of start with, I keep saying domestic tourism, but then I want us to look at it as the continent. We've got to get Africans visiting Africa. I'm not sure if that's domestic. It's domestic and Rwandans visiting the parks, so that sort of.
Yeah, so domestic, yeah, I think because it's an African panel, I was considering within your individual countries and of course within Africa.
So one have found is, as you know, with us sort of tour operators or private sector, we are, you know, there's different levels, and we don't actually ever meet the end consumer most of the times. So we're sort of booking through a wholesaler who's a tour operator in the US, who's booking through a travel agent who's then talking to the client. So we're finding we've had a huge dependence. Yes, I could certainly attest to that. The huge dependence on the international market. It's been our bread and butter. It's now, of course, now they're postponing, which means they're not going to pay us now. They're going to have to move, you know, because if you confirm to travel now, you're going to have to pay now. So now that you're seeing the clients moving their bookings to next year, that means we're not going to have the liquid cash to sort of, and I think that was the worry now is like, okay, so what do we do? How do we maintain our staff? How do we then carry on with all the marketing activities that we wanted to do? How do we then, but I think Rwanda, I think, is really, I'm not saying because I'm Rwanda, I'm saying, I think the government has been really helpful with having these conversations with the private sector on how they can sort of support us in this time, especially that we're not making the income that we would have been making. But then what we really adopt is really your digital. Are we looking at our websites now? Are we getting onto virtual exhibitions? Because I did one. I mean, as soon as COVID was announced, there's a sort of an exhibition that happens in Bale, Spain every year that I attend, and we had to do it virtually, and it actually worked. So then are we adopting this technology so that we're still able to then talk to our agents and give them the content that they need to sell? So those are key things that we still have to do at this point. So we're not closed for business. Honestly, I feel like now more than ever we're working harder, but certainly really look at the continent, and that's what I've been looking at. I mean, I've sort of been looking through my phone, who are the big influencers in Africa, who I've, you know, sort of never really looked at. How can I get, you know, Nigerians to talk about Rwanda? I know they're buying, you know, the luxury products, but, you know, travel is for, you know, for the high-end consumer. It's something that they want to do. They want to show off. So you still have these people that want to do that. It's just making sure that we are visible on the continent. And that's something that we sort of have to make sure that we are doing. So I think really the steps that we are doing, sort of your domestic market, and really adopting these technologies where we're still reaching out to the international business, which is quite important.
Joan, I just wanted to chime in on that around like how is the continent like aligning their approaches. And so there are a few sort of areas that have been top of mind and in conversation, and some of the regional conversations have been a part of. One has just been digitization and training. And so really using this opportunity where operators don't actively have travelers that they're hosting on tours to really use this opportunity to fill in some of the gaps on training, service delivery, and their ability to actually promote themselves. So Tastemakers as a platform is direct to consumer. So we have hosts on one side and we have, consumers on the other. So we don't have a middle ground. And what's been interesting is the amount of questions coming directly from operators like, oh, okay, I don't have any travelers. Can you teach me how to use Instagram Live? I don't have any travelers. Can you teach me how to do a Zoom? I don't have any travelers. Wanted to experiment with this, and we have a webinar to learn how to do this in our businesses. And so I think, teaching, training, and digitization for actual service delivery has been something that's been really interesting to watch. And then on the policy front, one of the things that I personally want to see is alignment around reopening. So rather than having, regional blocks, independent countries make reopening plans that could threaten the health of the region, what does it look like to have alignment, at least along regional blocks, on what is our reopening policy? What is our entry policy? How are we going to let U.S. citizens in when the U.S. doesn't even have their outbreak under control? Like, so these kind of regional approaches to the operation of African borders is something else I'm hoping to see. And then I think the last piece is around pooling resources. A lot of countries have launched funds to support smaller operators that are in that, but there's not a lot of standardization around what are the requirements, how are we reaching operators that may be unlicensed but still support a big part of the industry. How do we make sure that Africans are actually getting the benefit? Because as many people know, a lot of tourism on the continent is not owned by Africans themselves, it's owned by, external, some of the largest chunks of the industry. So I think those are the kind of questions that regional bodies and continental bodies, even potentially at the AU, some are asking those questions and finding those answers, but others are not. But, to your point around where the alignment should happen, I think those are the areas where we could be doing more.
Okay. Gael, do you have anything to add on that?
Not on this one in particular. Sorry.
No problem.
Can you hear me?
Are you there? Yes.
Yes. No, that we're gonna have to pay a bit attention on. Sorry, let me. One of the things that may happen as we are figuring out what's happening with the tourism industry here is we have to pay attention to what happens in the community surrounding some of the touristic assets that this country has to offer. I pretty much believe that the players in the industry can survive, but if we lose this, or if some of the assets become degraded due to this COVID-19, we might lose more in the long run. We've seen issues of poaching rising in South Africa. I'm pretty sure there's similar issues in a few other places. Now, poaching isn't an issue just for tourism. It's about the risk to begin with. It shows issues with supplies in communities surrounding natural area. But that's something that we should pay attention to because there's a risk there in the coming month.
Okay. So I think, what you guys are saying in terms of policy, we really do need to look a lot at the idea of opening up travel regionally, as we've talked about, in terms of access for passport, for flights, and just making it easier, not just for the short-term period, but for the fact that we as Africans should be exploring our continent anyway, and that we add value when we travel amongst ourselves. But I'm glad we ended on Gael's note, because we have a few questions specifically from the chat room that I'm going to ask. So Gael, I think this first one is for you. Anyone can answer, of course. How important is retaining the sacredness of the continent's natural environment a priority for the African countries looking to develop their tourism sector?
Well, I'd say it's key, at least for one aspect of tourism development, which is nature-based tourism. If you don't protect the nature, you can't have nature-based tourism. That's something relatively simple. Now, you're not only protecting your natural assets for tourism, you're doing it because what you're trying to do is protect your ecosystem services and enhance everything that your own country's policy for biodiversity is trying to achieve. So this is key for a number of aspects. You do not have quality national parks, pristine rainforests, and key species and charismatic species. It will be more difficult to develop that. That doesn't mean that it's the only thing you should do. We have seen, and I think Cherae played a big part in this, but we have seen a huge growth in all the other aspects of tourism development, particularly in West Africa, and that has been exciting. We need diversity of tourism, but nature will be important for this as well.
Yeah, and I think that, and I've seen some people asking in the chat room as well about, in terms of shifting direction to attract Pan-African tourism, maybe what might be the things that we need to do to actually get people excited about traveling. I think, to Bonita's point, when people started having destination weddings here in Rwanda, I think I was really surprised because I didn't really consider it initially as the kind of destination, because especially when they're coming from countries that have beaches and beautiful rainforests, and things that are just larger than us, right? But the story of Rwanda is a really big attraction. The story of people actually want to come and see the country for what it is, I think, as a country in Africa in terms of its success story, as well as its beautiful attractions, both natural and otherwise. So how do you think we can keep pushing for each other? I think for both Cherae and Bonita, this is a question for you two, to be able to explore our continent as much as possible.
I think what you want to look at is rates. I think what we have done, well, as a destination, we have positioned ourselves as the high-end destination. But forgive me, my references will always be to Rwanda because I'm based here.
It's all right.
One thing that we can look at is really sort of having, rates that are applicable, or sort of discounted rates for the region that will be more attractive. Sort of packages with the airlift as well. So what you want is a combined package that will sort of include your Rwanda Air, your city hotel, your product in nature, which is also discounted for them, and then your lodge in the rainforest or in the park. So I think what you want to have is have a whole package, and I think that's what we really should do, is really look at packaging, which is attractive to Africans on the continent. But I must say that you still have those clients that want to pay top dollar. So let's not forget packages, but then you have that segment of, I'm nothing against Dubai. It's no longer, your big Dubai and sitting in a 7-star hotel. Luxury is, an exclusive property with just 20 rooms, and you're able to book it solely for yourself. So I think that has changed. So you have those kind of segments of people that can travel. And just really, and what we have done even as a destination, we've really been focusing on the international market. Every trade fair that there is international.
Oops.
And do you want me to, Joan, do you want me to jump in?
Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
I think one of the things I found, when I first started Tastemakers, we were largely serving the diaspora market in the America and then eventually in the UK. And in the past year or so, we've seen an increase in the number of Africans on the continent using the platform, which is what we wanted. We always wanted to be a platform for Africans and diasporans, and we didn't understand sort of why there needed to be two separate things. But what the process was I think a lot of marketers take for granted that Africans on the continent know what's possible even in their own destination. And so I think one of the opportunities here is to invest as much time in educating and marketing to Africa, even locally. Like when I lived in Ghana for 6 months, it was amazing to see how excited and interested and willing to pay, millennial Ghanaians were in experiencing Ghana, let alone going to Nigeria, let alone going to Cote d'Ivoire. And so I think there's a huge opportunity. I want to shout out Turn Up Travel in Kenya, because I think they're doing an amazing job of creating an ecosystem for local travel, local marketing, because I think we take for granted this idea that like, oh, if I live in Ghana, of course I know what to do in Ghana. Oh, if I live in Rwanda, of course I know what to do in Rwanda. And the truth of the matter is, before you get to even regional or Pan-African tourism, just the idea of travel as a part of my life is something that, a lot of folks on the continent, like this is like, unless you're in the luxury segment, a lot of folks just think that travel is something they can't afford. They assume that travel is something for, and so until we transform that, we had the Black travel movement in the United States. The UK is having that moment. Black Brazilians are having that moment. So some of those movements, I think, are worth modification in the African context, so that Africans themselves see travel more in the realm of self-exploration and growth and possibility and connectivity. And I think African creatives are actually doing a wonderful job of dismantling the idea. Like when December in Ghana happened, we had so many South Africans in Ghana who 10 years ago would have never done that. 5 years ago would have never done that. They would have said, I'm not going to Africa, it's dangerous. And so I think the marketing and education, even more so than the fees. These are important, but there are a lot of middle class, upper class folks that literally just don't know. And I think you could take a parallel approach to serving those communities.
And yes, and I think someone had brought up a question about that parallel approach, is how do we actually approach the two at the same time? Go ahead, Gael.
No, I just wanted to add, Cherae talked about the marketing part, which has drastically changed the way Black people travel. One now thing that needs to happen to complement that is product development that is geared towards Black people or local communities or whatever. But this is now the next big step of innovation, I believe, that can happen on this continent, and we will see a lot of growth.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think so too. Yes, go ahead.
But I think one thing that we should certainly look at is as a destination, as Africa as a continent is very, when you are touring, it's very educational and it's incredibly informative. I mean, the experience that you have on the Maldives that's sat on a beach compared to what you and your family would experience when they're touring in Africa and sort of, learning about biodiversity, conservation and the animals. That in itself is education. So perhaps when you're sort of looking at your family sort of a multi-gen travel, then you're sort of saying to them that there's education, it's informative, your children are going to be able to learn from this, and that's something that's quite key.
I think that is critical because also here in Rwanda, there was a big campaign to shift the perception of what tourism meant. So the name for a tourist was someone who wanders around aimlessly. So there was no real purpose to their adventure. It wasn't an adventure. It wasn't anything good. It was just someone who might be potentially lost. So there was that. So there was that challenge. That perception had to be shifted. And it's time for us to round off. But there's a really good question I want to ask all you guys. Virtual tourism. I think some people have begun to initiate virtual tours of their natural attractions or their destinations. Do you think this is going to harm or help tourism? Will it dilute the product by giving people a chance to visit from the comfort of their own home? Or will it get people excited about actually wanting to to come to the country post-COVID?
I think it'll get people excited. I think,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, debut. I mean, use in a safari car in the park is completely different from seeing it virtually. You can't even compare them. You know,
Yes.
it's two different. So I think more and what most, and you'll see now with the operators, sort of your Singita, your and beyond. Every morning you get up, you're able to do a virtual safari, which is incredible, and that's exciting people. And honestly, you'd want to have the proper experience after you've seen the virtual safari. So I think it will excite people rather than the opposite.
Yeah, I don't think there's that much difference between watching a National Geographic video on Masai Mara, a virtual tour of Masai Mara. There's a novelty effect to the 3D thing, but like Bonita just said, it may give access to an experience to people who wouldn't do it beforehand, but those who want to do it, they'll still do it.
Bonita, are you
And
still
it might
there?
convert a few more people.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yes,
Can you see
Gael,
me?
are you there?
Yeah, Gael's talking.
I think I've lost Gael and
Can you hear
Cherae.
me?
Cherae, are you there?
We're all here.
Refresh.
Yeah, we're all here.
Okay. Yeah, I can. But the other two have gone.
No, we're here.
I think
We're
we're meant
here.
to be wrapping up. Maybe we're getting cut off one by one.
And they're still on the line.
Something
I
final
can still
before we
see
go?
them.
You can still see them? I can't hear Gael. Can you hear Gael?
Gael was sort of
I'm here.
saying something. Yeah.
We're all here.
Okay, maybe if you can still hear him, I can let him continue.
Okay.
Gael, you want to continue? Like, we can all hear you. I think Joan's thing is having
No, sorry, I can't hear him.
Yes, no, I was just saying that I really believe that there's a novelty effect to it that.
All right, sorry everyone. I understand that everybody can. I think most of you can see and hear everybody, but I've lost Cherae and Gael. And I've also been told that it's time to wrap up this session for the next one. Yeah, Bonita, you can still hear me?
Yes, we can still hear you. And they're both still on.
All right. Okay, sorry about that. I'm not sure why I can't see you guys. But I've been asked to wrap up anyway, so I'm going to thank you all for being here today. Thank you so much for taking the time and being a part of this. And thank you also to everyone who is submitting the questions and being a part of the chat. I think we want to share everybody's information so we can keep in touch and keep this conversation going. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Gael. Thanks, Cherae. Joan.
Take care. All right. Thank you. Bye. Bye, everybody. Thank you.